Do you have a power antenna in your Honda that doesn't work? If so, this video can help you. A lot of us were happy to see these mechanical antennas go away. I mean, they were really cool, but they did have a lot of problems. And this video will apply pretty much to Hondas across the board that have these power antennas. Now, customers would come in and they'd say, fix my antenna. And it seems like an easy prospect. But I'm going to tell you right now at the onset, especially now that these vehicles are getting older and corrosion is a factor, that may not necessarily be the case, and you may be in for a lot more than you bargained for. Therefore, what I suggest if you run into trouble during this process is that you scrap the idea of a power antenna altogether, just like I did on my Acura Vigor, and just replace it with a whip antenna. This is an antenna mast assembly that I got from Honda. You can purchase this separate from the motor assembly, and many times this is all you need. However, I cannot stress enough how you may be in for a fight with these things because of corrosion and other issues that may come up. This video, I intend to cover as many possibilities that you might run into during this job, and hopefully with that information, you'll be able to deal with it. If not, like I said, you can give up, you can get one of those whip assemblies, and that'll work just fine. But if you're dead set on a power antenna, keep watching. This is the first place where you may run into trouble. Now, a lot of people may use a pair of needle nose pliers to try to get this antenna nut off. And that can work, but I'll be honest, you'll probably cheese it up pretty good. You can sometimes put a pair of channel locks around the outside of this and unscrew it, but there is a special tool available from Honda, and you can probably barely make out the part number there. I will link it down in the description to make it easier for you. But this is the special tool from Honda for doing this very thing. And with it, you just slide it over the antenna. It requires a 19mm wrench to operate. And I, as stated, am very fortunate that this is coming apart like it is, because this may not happen. I will also mention that this covers Hondas, Acuras. This is their antenna assembly. They ran it, they just had different configurations depending upon make and model. So even though I'm doing this on an Acura Integra, Honda Accord of this vintage, other Acuras of this vintage, Legends, Acura Vigors. As you can see how lucky I am that that came off. This may get corroded onto the shaft here. If that's the case, don't be afraid to destroy it. Go ahead and destroy this to get it off, because you'll have to replace the antenna and these parts. Some of these parts, like this antenna nut, are available separately, but be very careful around your quarter panel because you can actually do a lot of damage in here. Now that I have it this far, the antenna should come out of the tube. It may or may not happen. But step 2 is pull the antenna out of the tube. And I'm just going to do that like that. Once again, I cannot express how lucky I am being here. It does not happen like this, especially on older vehicles. And I got almost everything. I'm glad at least I've run into this difficulty because I can show you the next step. But this is not everything. And I'll show you over on the bench what I mean. Comparing this to the new part, what's missing? That's right, the metal sleeve. The metal sleeve is still down in there. Super common problem. Another thing that I noticed immediately, because I've done several of these, is that this is not the complete assembly. I have a feeling that there's a broken piece down inside the motor. However, we're going to have to deal with this, which is job 1, and that is getting this metal piece out. Now, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. My preferred method is to remove the old metal piece from the mast assembly. You can take the new metal piece off the new assembly and slide this down in there if you're having too much trouble. That's option B. Now, to get that metal part out of the assembly, I use an easy out of this size, and this one is a 13/32 drill bit size, something equivalent to this, but this one right here has been my go-to tool for this for a very long time. Your best friend is going to be penetrating oil. Start with penetrating oil and soak the outside of it before you ever get started. Once you've let that soak in for a bit, very gently use the easy out to try and move the silver piece. First you want to spin it, and then you'll worry about getting it out of there. But that's the hardest part, getting it to spin, because you're probably twisting the whole mast assembly down inside the vehicle. So once you start to feel tension, just keep working it and let that penetrating oil do its thing. This one feels like it might not cooperate, but we're going to have to take the motor assembly out anyway, and I think that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes you can do this in the car, sometimes you can't. And since I'm going to have to remove the motor assembly to remove the broken piece, I'm going to stop right there and do the rest of this on the bench. Otherwise, I could break this. Now we need to get the motor assembly out. Now, depending upon the make and model that you have, there will be inner trim pieces and panels that you'll likely need to remove. But once you get to the motor assembly, it's virtually the same. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail in this part because, as I mentioned, it's going to vary by vehicle. But for this Integra, I need to remove the center panel, and I can pull back this side panel to access the motor assembly, which is behind here. I will say that at the onset of this job, resign yourself to having to take the motor out because 98% of the time you have to. Well, that water down in there is not so good. I don't like that at all. Is that coming from the antenna drain or the sunroof drain or the tail light? We've got a video on water leaks, but we're not going to concern ourselves with that in this video. Now, surprisingly, there's really only one fastener that holds the motor on, which is this one. And you don't have to completely remove it. It's a 10mm nut. Once you remove that fastener, you can pull it right out as one unit. But know that there is a drain, oftentimes, back inside of here that you're going to need to disconnect as well. Now, as stated, there is the drain connection. There's also an electrical connection. These things will be easier to see after I remove the motor assembly. For now, 10mm fastener right here that I'm going to loosen. It's almost like someone has been in here before. Okay. There's the electrical connection I spoke of right there. Here's the drain connection. This tube just pulls right out. And last but not least, the actual antenna connection. Can't forget about that part. Now it's ours. This piece can come out or stay in on its own. Really doesn't matter. Here's a complete assembly in my hand here. The part that came off is this top support that goes under here, and these can also be changed out easily. It's just held on by this plastic clip there, and you can swap it and take it off. It's only clipped on the one side, so there's only one way that it goes on and off. This is that silver piece I spoke of that is still down inside the assembly. There's one more thing still down in here, and that is the rest of this cord, which I mentioned earlier. Now, because we heard the motor running, we know the motor works. So when I was turning that key on and off, the radio on and off, you could hear the motor run. That means that part is okay. We just have to sort out the mechanicals, which is what we're doing now. To access that broken piece that's left, there are two screws that hold this cover onto the motor that you need to remove. Phillips head screws. And this is the part most of you are going to have to do no matter what. Take that part of the cover off. Then there's this inner piece here that needs to come out, sort of like a guide. And that is where you will find the rest of your antenna. Now that we've removed that piece, you can actually just put it all back together. You're probably thinking, what should I lubricate that with? I would leave it alone. I think it was a special type of lithium grease that they used inside of these, and I think if you mix it with other grease, it would be a problem. So if you do decide to use different lubricants, make sure you clean everything out. But that's one more hurdle that we've gotten out of the way. If you find that you just cannot get this piece out, or in some way, shape, or form, you destroy this tube, the silver piece here. For a long time, it was available separately, and you can replace just this part. These motors, as a complete assembly, are stupid expensive, especially for cars that are this old. And salvage, once the corrosion is the issue, and a lot of times, the corrosion that you'll find in these tubes is going to be right down in here, in this area. And the tube will corrode and pretty much rot away. In fact, I've seen them to where this is just one big gaping hole, and the only thing holding it on is this brace up here. There's another plastic tube down inside of here that allows the antenna to move up and down, but all the structural integrity is gone once that happens. But once again, you can rebuild these, but it takes quite a bit of effort. In fact, I have a lot of these stashed in my parts department for times just like this if I need spare parts. Because really the motor assembly, this is why I say this is the same across Hondas. The motor assembly, this part is virtually the same on every model. They changed the tube and the connection up here and everything else and the length of the antenna. That's about it. But this will be very familiar if it's an Accord, if it's a Legend, if it's a Vigor, if it's an Integra, if it's a Civic. Well, they didn't. Did they have them in Civics? I don't think they did. But anyway, you get the idea. Preludes. So now we're going to try to get this piece out. And rather than it being in the car and me running the risk of twisting this entire thing, I brought it out of the car so I could put it in the vise. Still going to try the same thing. Just going to do it out here in the vise instead of on the vehicle. You know what this antenna needs? More cowbell or penetrating oil. Penetrating oil is probably the way to go. Ah, that's encouraging. Once it starts to move, keep spinning and pull up. Here or right there. Now we're ready to install our new antenna. We've removed the broken piece. We've removed the rest of the antenna. Aces. Now, as stated, I keep a couple of these around for spares. And also, as stated, many of them are the same. I mean, the motor assemblies are the same. It's the masts that are different and the connections up here. So that's where you'll find your differences. But since I have these spares, why don't we take one apart and I'll show you some of the things that you might run into in this tube and how to replace this tube if you have an issue there. Remember I spoke of before and I said I've seen them completely corroded and rotted away at the base here, and there's a plastic tube on the inside. You're looking at it. Now say you need to get the tube removed. There are two Phillips head screws you need to concern yourself with, and that is this one that you need to completely remove, and this one that you'll need to loosen. As I said, you don't need to take it all the way out. Now, what do we need? That's right, kids. Penetrating oil. Yay! This is where the corrosion happens mostly, because the water gets right down in here with the antenna. It's brought down into this area. That's why this drain tube is here. So all the water just sits right here. So whatever salt stuff gets in here, or just the water in general, eventually causes this to corrode, and you see what I showed you earlier. But if we're lucky, and if not, I'm going to go grab that one that's already broken, because I'd rather not destroy this assembly, because this assembly is good to save the antenna. This is aluminum, meaning don't squeeze too hard. Yeah, I'm having some difficulty here. Anyhow, that's how this piece comes out. We'll go back and get the one that's already broken, and I'll show you what you're dealing with once you get that tube out. We're back to this one that already has, well, I can't say that it's removed because it's still broken off down in here, but this is what you'll find once you remove that tube, which is this plastic tube, and then another plastic tube down inside. Now this plastic tube has an O-ring, and I'm trying to figure out how I can show that to you. And that O-ring is kind of important, because the O-ring helps guide things. There's a giant gear behind here that basically connects with those teeth on that antenna mast assembly that I showed you. And then it just sort of coils around in here. Here's a sensor to say, okay, the motor's had enough, stop moving. But I don't think in this case we'll be able to get this plastic piece out, because there's still some broken material down in there. And that is unfortunate, because I would love to show that to you. Let's see if penetrating oil and removing this screw will do the trick. Actually, you don't have to remove this screw completely. I just like to, because it's basically pinching the bottom part of this assembly in. Sometimes take a flathead screwdriver and just break apart everything that's left. It'd be easier if it's in this vise. And by the way, when I grab my hammer, got my safety glasses. Remember when I said at the beginning of this video, you may be in for a lot more than you bargained for? This is what I meant. Yeah, I can't tell you how many customers would come in. Even when these things were relatively new, we still had all of these issues. And we would have to tell them that their simple radio antenna repair was going to cost hundreds of dollars. They were not happy to hear it, and I don't blame them, because every time a service writer would say, that'll just be a half hour, it'll be real easy. Well, admittedly, some did go that way, but a majority did not. With the majority, it was so much more. So anytime somebody came to me and said, can you fix my power antenna on my Honda? I was like, yes, but it will be expensive. And I usually ended up putting in one of those whip antennas. You would think you wouldn't have a problem because, you know, aluminum, plastic. But it's a problem. So often this is a problem. Ready to go out and buy the whip antenna yet? There's one chunk. Well, there goes the plastic. And that's not uncommon when they're this bad. And it may be the point where you finally call it. But I'm doing this so you don't have to. Because at this point, I realize that this is a lost cause. There we have it, the remainder. Part here you see along the plastic is the tube, the aluminum part of the tube. I don't know if I'll be able to get it off there, but yeah, there we go. There's the remainder of the aluminum part of the tube. That's what you'll find down at the base of this plastic. So once you got the aluminum tube out, there's a plastic part. This is a ground, and then this here is the O-ring I spoke of. Without this O-ring, it won't go in and align properly. So if this isn't here, it's not going to hook up to the motor correctly. So this needs to be down in here. So if you're able to carefully, more carefully than I got a little impatient towards the end, but as you can see, it was completely corroded. But that will get you to the point where you can replace the tube if necessary. And then the rest of the procedure is identical. Once you get this motor mast assembly intact and get it installed in the vehicle, getting the antenna assembly in is identical. I'm going to install this back on the vehicle. Remember, it only goes on one way. Clip it there. Bring my nut with me. Let's head over. I'm now ready to reinstall the assembly and make sure that that nut is loose so that it can slide up in there. Let's start with the antenna. Slide it up on there. Next, the drain, which is super difficult to show you. And now, I'm going to sort of sneak it up in behind this harness and restore the electrical connection. Now we've got everything reconnected, we need to fish it back up through the quarter panel. And I'm going to take this plastic piece here, make sure that sits down in, and at the same time we want to slide the nut up in here. Hold it in place, tighten the fastener. That's not going anywhere.
Next, turn the radio on until you hear the motor fully extend so that you know that it's as if the antenna was all the way up. Good.
I now have my new antenna in hand. If you notice, it's got teeth on one side like a ripcord. These teeth need to engage with what's down inside here with the motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert it down in to the antenna tube, and you'll sort of feel a little bit of resistance. There's a rubber O-ring down at the bottom of at the base of this. Then I'm going to lay it here and go and turn the radio off. When I come back, the motor's going to be running to draw the antenna back down into the assembly. I'm going to sort of twist this around until I'm sure that the teeth engage with the motor, which is probably going to be something like this. And once it does, it's going to pull the antenna down into the tube. It's not going to be able to pull it down in there all the way, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. But this is where the skill comes in. Ready? As I said, it doesn't matter that it didn't draw it all the way down in. Now I'm going to get my antenna nut. I'm going to reinstall that. And I'm just going to do it by hand. You don't need to over tighten this. Once this is secure on the quarter, no need to do any more. Now we turn the radio on and then off, and it should extend all the way and then retract all the way.
And now when I turn it off, it should retract completely.
Win. One last thing before I leave you about these power antennas. Periodically, they require cleaning and maintenance. Do not use penetrating oil. The preferred thing is silicone spray. I take some silicone spray, and you want to do this, I used to do it during the services, which were about 15,000 mile intervals on these vehicles, and that seemed to work okay. But silicone and a rag, and I just take it and spray. And then this will clean and lubricate it, and it won't harbor the dust. That's why I say use silicone lubricants over like penetrating oils, because the oils will allow dirt and attract dirt and things like that, which will eventually clog this up and cause it not to work as well. The silicone I found to be the best thing to lubricate antenna masts with. So that will ensure that you won't have to do this job again anytime in the near future. I am now the proud owner of a working power antenna in my Acura. It's like a unicorn, you don't often see it. In fact, most of the time you see those whip antennas. And as I mentioned throughout this video, you may get in a lot deeper than you think you will. And one of those whip antennas would be a perfect solution. I did it to my other Acura. This one, however, was salvageable. So I'm hoping the information in this video will help you if you want to fix the power antenna on your Honda or Acura product. I'll post links in the description to any important information such as the tools or parts or things like that that I used. I'm also going to put a link in the description to EricTheCarGuy.com, which is where I ask you to go if you have automotive questions. Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if you wish to connect with me socially. I post repair videos on Fridays, so stop back and see me then. Oh, and turn your radio off before you go in the car wash. Definitely. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.